by various meetings.
Yeah. Hello.
Hello again.
I think I will have seen lots of you twice today.
I know, right? Well, this is the last time I couldn't get on Zoom, but I am now.
Yeah, you're looking better. You're not frozen in place.
Hey, Richard, Helen.
Hi, I'm out in the backyard hanging my wash up.
Yep, looks like Helen's going to be spotty today.
Spotty?
Yeah,
Oh,
you're
yeah,
kind of
nice.
tuning in and out here.
I'm in the backyard, but I can hear you fine. I'll be going back in a minute. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect. Not a problem.
Hello, Maria. This is Scott Horsley. Nice to meet you.
Hi there. My apologies. I can only be on for about 45 minutes. I've got another meeting. I've got a, I don't know, I got a day full of meetings today.
I know that. I have several of those too.
Don't worry, we're going to talk really fast.
I apologize
Right.
for the background. I'm on vacation up in Vermont, so I'm kind of making things happen here. So,
Where in Vermont are you, Scott?
I'm actually in Concord, Vermont, which I've never been to. It's the Northeast Kingdom. It's actually about an hour from the Canadian border, west of the White Mountains. I got a great view of the presidential range out here.
Nice.
It's really quite beautiful, and we got some nice snow, so it's a good getaway.
Spent a lot of time with friends in Barton when I was in college.
Oh, okay, nice.
Up beyond St. Johnsbury, and we used to get big vats of ice cream from the Ben and Jerry's plant up there. They would give out to the community ones that they called seconds. So
Those
if
were
you're
good,
familiar with
good
Cherry Garcia, it's chocolate chips and
Sure.
cherries in it. We would end up with 5-gallon buckets, and the reason there was something wrong with them is because they had too many cherries.
Nice.
It was a good college student living back then.
Well, I went to school in Vermont as well, so lots of stories from Vermont land. Anyway, since we're short on time, we've got a quorum, so we might as well get going. Hillary, is that you sharing the screen, or Scott? Are you?
No,
on?
I was able to do it, so I'm ready to go, Kurt. And I know we're short on time.
Terrific. Just by way of introduction, in order to prioritize what we're going to try to do today, I'm going to reorder the agenda a little bit. I think the biggest thing we were trying to accomplish today was to have a discussion mainly with Maria to try to figure out some financing strategies for wastewater. Scott's going to go through sort of the elements, a lot of the nuts and bolts here, Maria, and some of the background. But, what we're really trying to focus on is, whether the Airbnb revenue could be dedicated as it was intended to be toward wastewater, what elements of, town meeting warrant items might make sense going forward. And, so that's sort of the bigger picture. And then there's specific elements here we can talk about in terms of how they may phase out over time, in terms of both, staff, institutional support for the wastewater program, and then operating funding as well as capital funding for various elements, if that makes sense. So
it does, but if I may, I can have sort of a high level discussion about financing. I wasn't really clear on, what the specific topic was. Any specific conversation about financing is going to need to be another meeting with me and Heather Michaud, my accountant, and with Miriam, the treasurer, because Miriam helps to coordinate that whole issuance of bonds and all those things. And certainly it's Heather's bailiwick, make sure that we're doing things that make sense, especially if you're looking for anything that needs to be in this proposed budget.
Yeah, and at this
But we
point,
can have high level conversations, but if you want to have specific questions and get down to the nitty gritty, I need those two staff people included.
yeah, no, it's mainly a high level to start to get, so that we can get our arms around it. This isn't really a specific conversation, but just, in general, is it bigger than a bread box or is it bigger than the Brooklyn Bridge type of a thing? But, here's roughly over the next 10 to 20 years, what wastewater spending is going to start to look like. And the truth of the matter, the fact of the matter is, we had a $500,000 town meeting authorization in 2010 to do the analysis work to come up with a set of alternatives. And long story short, that process evolved over a much longer period of time than people would have imagined or thought, mainly because there were so many changes to the regular structure. And so that now, our 208 plan now is a result of a lot of changes over the last 8 years. And so what Scott's going to present is sort of a heavily alternatives based approach for the town of Wellfleet that, we believe has the potential to save about, or cost about 1/10 of what building a wastewater treatment system would cost. So $150 million type wastewater treatment approach can be distilled down to the things that, Scott's going to present here.
Okay.
Okay, so with that, Maria, I know you have some background in these matters from your prior dealings. I'm not familiar. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the details of the Cape situation or Wellfleet specifically. So I'm going to go in the interest of time pretty quickly here and let you stop me or slow me down if that's okay. And then we can, because there's actually a lot of material to potentially cover. This slideshow is one that I presented last week or the week before to the Wastewater Committee. So some of this may be, we can skip through quickly, but I'll just quickly mention targeted watershed plan is what an option to get approval for Mass DEP for compliance with the Clean Water Act. And that's what, that's really the goal of this project that I'm working on to help prepare a plan that we can submit to DEP on behalf of the town to get approval for a so-called watershed plan. As Kurt mentioned, there is an option now because of 208, which I also worked on as a consultant, that this can be achieved using a number of different so-called technologies or strategies other than sewering. And I mean, sewering will work, but it tends to be expensive, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at a number of alternatives along with a sewering backup plan, which we can touch base on. This is, you may have, I don't know if you've seen the MEP report. MEP is Mass Estuaries Project. That's the state sanctued process for studying these estuaries across the Cape. And these are the various sub-watersheds within Wellfleet, and the numbers that you're seeing here and the percentages of the required reductions to get to the thresholds to come into compliance. So you can see that some of them, particularly Duck Creek, downtown area, the Cove, are approaching 80% reduction in existing controllable nitrogen sources.
So are these,
this is a spreadsheet that we, go ahead. Yep.
These are TMDL levels?
Yes. So this is basically comparing the existing loads to TMDL, and the number you're seeing here is the difference. So it's the TMDL, which would be the maximum amount you can have compared to it's actually not only existing, but we actually included the build out of the town here. So what you're actually looking at is build out numbers minus TMDL, which would be the threshold number, equals the reduction required. And those are the numbers you're seeing here.
But converted from daily to annual.
Correct. That's
Gotcha.
right.
Yep,
That's right. TMDL technically means daily, but most
I've
people that I've been working with.
We've gone through the same process for Chesapeake Bay TMDLs and
Exactly.
watershed plan there.
Yep, exactly. So this is a spreadsheet which summarizes kind of where we're at. And I'm obviously not going to go through the whole thing, but very quickly at the top, you'll see here's the build out load, the existing load, and these are all in kilograms per year as well, the threshold, and then the reduction. So here's the math on how we got to those numbers on the map I just showed you. And you can see that each column is pertains to each one of the watersheds. And then starting down under nitrogen reductions are the various strategies we've been talking with the Wastewater Committee about over the last year or two, and we're starting to prioritize them and starting to get some, I think, some support for a number of different techniques. And I'm just going to highlight a few of those today, frankly, the ones that are highlighted here in yellow. And as you can see here, by going through the math on each one of these, we can calculate what's called nitrogen reduction credit. Most of these numbers come from, as you'll see in that fifth or sixth column there, titled reference. Many of them come from the Cape Cod Commission 208 plan, which provides sort of the basis for what we could assume to get for reductions for some of these technologies. And I'll kind of keep going, and maybe we can come back to that if we need to. If we look at the downtown area as an example, this is obviously just part of the town, a few of the watersheds. Each one of these dots, by the way, and I should tell you quickly, I'm colorblind, so I'm not sure whether they're green or yellow. They're probably green, right?
Agree.
Each one of these dots represents a septic system. The larger dot, theoretically, the bigger the load. Although in Wellfleet, because you're mostly on private wells, they didn't have a lot of data to base this on. But nonetheless, those are all locations of septic systems. And here we're highlighting, and I'll talk through with you today briefly on just 3 of the technologies that we think there's a lot of promise with. And I'll start in the lower right, INA, Innovative and Alternative Septic Upgrades. MassDEP, much like the Chesapeake actually, has approved, the Chesapeake states have approved a number of alternative septic technologies that get better nitrogen removal. So we're looking at that as really one of the core approaches here for the town. I'm sure you're familiar with the 95 Lawrence project, which we talked about this morning. It's really, I think, an exciting opportunity for the town to achieve both affordable housing goals and water quality restoration at the same time. So we can go into a lot of detail on that, but we won't necessarily today. And then one of the exciting opportunities, I think, fits very well with Wellfleet on a planning basis, this so-called PRB, or permeable reactive barrier. And I've got a couple slides on that, which looks like one place to start considering this might be in the Commercial Street area that kind of lines the western shoreline of the Duck Creek and Cove area. I don't think I need to spend much time on the 95 Lawrence project, but as you probably know, there's been a consideration to tie that project to some municipal properties in the immediate neighborhood, as well as some neighborhood homes. And it looks like that's going to be, we've been working, I've been working with Dave Formato from On-Site Engineering, as well as Tim Passacarnis at the Cape Cod Commission, to develop some of these cost estimates, which kind of suggest and show that that third alternative, the larger project, the neighborhood project, really makes this pretty cost effective. And again, I won't spend much more time on that. We perhaps can come back to that. Not sure whether you're familiar with permeable reactive barriers, but I've just got a couple slides introducing the concept here. What we're finding out, interestingly enough, is that wood chips provide a very successful bioreactive media for removing nitrogen. And so this is essentially a trench of wood chips, if I can oversimplify it. The trick is to get the trench deep enough, right? Current technology gets you down to around 40-foot deep depth, as you can see in the slide. And the idea is to intercept the groundwater that already has the nitrogen in it. There are two or three projects which have been built on the Cape so far, and they're all working very well, achieving levels of in the 80 to 90% nitrogen removal range. So this is one of the PRB techniques, to dig a trench along the shoreline and intercept the groundwater. Another option is being used in Orleans, where they're researching this, is to install a series of injection wells as opposed to a trench. And instead of wood chips, we're injecting a carbon-based fluid, almost like a vegetable oil emulsion. And again, that's working quite well too. But you need a fence of wells, probably one every 10 feet or so, if you can sort of visualize that. This is the target area that we've identified as a pilot project. And I'll just mention, in achieving approval with DEP on some of these watershed plans, especially for what they call non-traditional alternatives, what they like to see is a first step pilot project to prove it out in the town. And this is an area that we've identified that includes some town property. It looks like it's in a very good area relative to groundwater flow directions and also density of septic systems, where we might be able to consider building a pilot project to test out this technology. I'll skip over that one. Whoops, these are repeated, sorry. And just quickly introduce a third PRB technology idea that comes from Long Island. We recently learned about an installation down there. Instead of putting the trench, say, a couple hundred feet from the shore, which is where these are traditionally put, one idea is to integrate this technology with a bulkhead. So down in Long Island, I'll just show you a picture of a slide. Helps. So this is an aerial view here. There's a bulkhead along the shoreline. This is what it looks like during construction. And the idea here is if they're going to be building a coastal structure for other reasons, to reestablish the shoreline for erosion or perhaps deal with sea level rise, perhaps that's a good place to integrate these wood chips and build a reactive media there. And that's exactly what they did on Long Island. And again, they had very good results in the 80 to 90% range. So this is a third option that we were thinking about. We actually had a very interesting discussion with the Wellfleet Conservation Commission a couple of weeks ago about the possibility of integrating this in some of their project reviews, because my understanding is some of those existing barriers might be coming up for redesign and reconstruction. And the idea here is that maybe that's a very cost-effective time to consider essentially adding the wood chips, if you, again, let me oversimplify it just for the sake of discussion. So we think the PRB approach is something that really could have a lot of merit. This is just another kind of cross-sectional picture, which again, we won't go into detail. The idea would be to, maybe I'll just go back to this one because this shows a couple of monitoring wells within the structure. Just to give you an idea of the dimensions of these things from Long Island, they're really about 1 or 2 meters in width and about 2 to 3 meters in depth. Fit pretty well along with some of the coastal structures we're seeing in Wellfleet that might work. So in any case, that's kind of the PRB approach. Here's another graphic that we actually put together with Ryan Curley, one of your selectmen, who's been really helpful and used to be on the Wastewater Committee, as you may know. Ryan provided us with some data on where are all the seawalls across the town. And there's a lot more than I thought there were in Wellfleet, to be honest with you. And again, the thought is here, as these come up for reconstruction, and we might consider that as an opportunity. I should also mention, keep in mind that this plan is intended to be something that would be implemented over a 30-year period or more. The town of Barnstable prepared a 60-year plan recently. They've more recently cut it back to 30, but my guess is they'll end up closer back to the 30 to 60 timeframe. So that timeframe is important to keep in mind when we talk about some of these alternatives, because we don't need to go out and build all this stuff tomorrow. And in fact, I think we can make some of these projects can be done much more cost effectively if we time them along with other construction that might be happening. And that is true of the INA septics as well. And that's what I wanted to address next. And again, you may be familiar with some of this in Massachusetts. And again, I know in the Chesapeake area, they've been doing the same thing, as well as Long Island and somewhat in Florida. They're looking at other technologies that might improve on a septic system. And one of the ones that we've had the best luck with on the Cape and Martha's Vineyard is a technology called nitro. So I'll just use that as an example. And you can see from this picture, here's your standard septic tank and your standard leach field. And essentially what's happening here is they're putting an additional tank in the middle filled with, you guessed it, wood chips, along with, in this case, some limestone to neutralize the pH. And again, he's getting some of the more recent data I've seen is in not only the 90% range, but the 95% removal range. He has 18 of these systems in Massachusetts. They currently have what's called provisional approval. Once he gets about 50 or 60 of these in for a period of 3 years, if the data still looks as good as it does today, he'll be able to achieve general approval, which will mean these can kind of go anywhere. And I had some, go ahead, please.
So I'm familiar with wood chips. We actually used wood chips as an odor control measure for the sewage treatment plant in Newport, and I've used them in stream restoration, building them into the weirs. How long does the research recommend that these wood chips are still viable, and do they have a peak performance after, I don't know, 5 years or something? You know, what's the anticipated replacement rate for the chips?
Great question. The best research I've seen on that is a researcher up in Canada at Waterloo his name is Robertson. He's published on this, he's been thinking about wood chips for about 20 years. Most of us have only been thinking about it for the past 2 to 5 years, but he's been working on this for a long time. In fact, he has some projects he's been monitoring for more than 20 years. So he has a little bit of a beginning answer to that. One of his systems he installed, I know, has been in the ground, I think it was for 17 years. And I can send you the article, but I believe it's correct to quote that he determined a 3% decomposition of wood chips over that 17-year period. That's the best indication that I know we have to date. I think the honest answer is we don't know, but I think
So
that
3% over the whole time period?
17 years. Over
Okay,
17
only
years.
3% over 17 years.
Right. So everybody that I've talked to, including Robertson and some other people, are suggesting that the answer to your question is probably on the order of decades, but we don't know whether it's 2, 3, or 4. Now, the good news is, as John Smith, the inventor of this system, will tell you, to replace the wood chips on this system is about a 1-hour operation and probably in the cost range of a couple $100. So if you do a life cycle analysis and add $200 over 20 or 30 years, you can kind of forget about it, but from a cost standpoint, but it's definitely, all of these systems, including a centralized wastewater treatment plant, require maintenance and monitoring, et cetera, et cetera. So you're absolutely right. And in fact, the limestone on the system would also need to be replaced, John Smith estimates, once every 10 years or so. So all of these maintenance issues and costs have to go into a life cycle analysis to compare these different technologies. And that's exactly what we're working on. I just want to transition to a couple of slides that Hillary helped me with. And I think, again, this illustrates maybe not only what we can do to address this problem, but how we can do it over time. So Hillary provided me with some information on how many so-called repairs, upgrades, and new septic systems are occurring in Wellfleet. So I just took these 3 years, and then I projected it out over a 20-year planning period. So you can see that at the current rate, we might have in excess of 1,000 systems are going to come before Hillary and her board to decide whether to upgrade, just simply put in another Title V, et cetera. And my thought is if we develop a program and we do have a health regulation proposed before the Board of Health, we're considering this, that we integrate these technologies as we have projects coming up and again doing construction anyways, that we could achieve some pretty good removals over a period of time. And if we plan it with other construction going on the site, I think it makes it a lot more cost effective and a lot more palatable to the homeowners. We also looked at real estate transfers because as you may know, in Massachusetts, we have a law that requires when you buy or sell a piece of property, an inspection of the system. And if it requires upgrades at that time, then they're done. So that's kind of a nice trigger that already exists within the law that we might be able to piggyback on as a means of trying to get these systems in the ground over time. And as you can see, I've done some calculations over this 20-year period, and it looks like both of these techniques might be a pretty good way at getting at those reductions. And I think I'm just going to skip. Go ahead.
So Scott, those would be included as an option for homeowners as one of the options that they have, but you're looking at they would be required upon transfer of property or
yeah. So we have. I'm sorry.
Or failure of the current system.
Exactly. We have a regulation pending. I don't have the slide in here today, but I can quickly summarize it for you, and I'll happy to send you the draft regulation. Essentially what it says is for repairs, upgrades, or new systems, if you are in the Wellfleet Harbor watershed, which is most of the town, that you would be required to put in what we're calling an enhanced INA system. And the enhanced INA, we have about 10 or 12 technologies in Massachusetts that are currently approved as INA systems for nitrogen removal, but the vast majority of them only provide marginal benefit. There's 2 or 3 new technologies, including the one that I highlighted today, which we're trying to call, we're separating them, calling enhanced, because they're getting like 90% removal rather than something like 40 or 50% removal. So the regulations, back to the regulation, it says for repairs, upgrades, new systems, the homeowner would be required to put one of these in, instead of reinvesting in what we'll call an old technology that we know that doesn't work, that being Title V for nitrogen. Now, the other part of that regulation, Maria, that we should let you know about is, at least the way it's drafted, is that the town would provide a subsidy to the homeowner. The current regulation says $12,500, which is the cost of that nitro tank. So in this sense, the town would be subsidizing the nitrogen reduction benefit. And the homeowner would retain the costs on the construction, whatever landscaping, and other parts of the system, like if they needed a new septic tank or they need to upgrade the leach field, they'd be responsible for that. That's the way the regulation is envisioned now. It doesn't have to be that way, but our thought was that it might make sense for some sort of a cost share. And one could argue that, you know, one system's going in to remove nitrogen, the neighbor is not removing nitrogen. How come they get to continue to, quote, pollute the harbor? And the answer might be that if it's subsidized by the town, then we're sharing those costs and not putting that burden on any one homeowner. But that's all up for grabs. And that goes back to maybe Kurt's thought about how this whole thing gets financed. But I just wanted to alert you that we do have a regulation we've had, I think, 3 meetings with the Board of Health. I'll let Hillary explain more detail, but I think they're interested and willing to seriously consider this as an approach going forward. And if I went back to my, just quickly back to my spreadsheet, you'll see, if you look at this in any detail, if you look in this right-hand column, these are the reductions. And the current plan, the health regulation here going forward has 8,000 kilograms reduction. The existing systems that would come in for repairs over the period of time would be 7,000. You start comparing that to other numbers in our strategy, they're by far the biggest numbers. So this is a pivotal decision. I would almost say at this point that the town really has 2 choices to meet these thresholds. One is an aggressive I&A program or a centralized sewer. Because these other technologies that we're thinking about, the PRB, and I haven't talked about shellfish, but they're part of the plan, and certainly Herring River and Mayo Creek restorations, all of those things will help. But when you look at the numbers, wastewater is clearly driving the situation here. And so this I&A program is an important consideration for the town, as well as the 95 Lawrence project. That's what we already covered.
Scott, is it required by the state or the 208 plan or something that the town pay for this?
So the Clean Water Act is the driver here. It's a federal law, and all 15 towns.
Pretty familiar with that.
Yeah, I'm sure you are, coming from the Chesapeake, right? All 15 towns on the Cape are out of compliance with the Clean Water Act. As you may know, there was a lawsuit by the Conservation Law Foundation, I guess it's about 7 years ago now. And that essentially held the fire to the feet of the 15 towns on the Cape. And that's what created the 208 plan. Because the Cape Cod Commission said, wait a minute, before we run out and spend, I think the number was $800 billion for sewering at that point, let's take another look and see if there's some better ways to do this. And that's kind of where all of this came from. And as Kurt suggested earlier on, it appears from what we know so far that these technological approaches are considerably less expensive. But to answer your question, the driver here is Mass DEP, who has to enforce the Clean Water Act. And essentially what they're telling the 15 towns is you have to meet your MEP thresholds. And the Conservation Law Foundation is the nonprofit legal group, and who is still in court, by the way. The case is on hold, pending watching what the 15 towns in the Cape do. So the drivers are really Mass DEP and Conservation Law Foundation.
But they're requiring us to meet a TMDL. We're
Correct.
not under a compliance order that we have to pay for it.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
what is the town's legal obligation for the town itself to pay for this?
If we didn't pursue an alternative strategy, we'd have to build a wastewater treatment facility. So that goes to town meeting. So the town's going to pay for it one way or the other.
So the rationale is an avoided cost of that system.
Exactly. Do you want to
Okay,
spend
so we're
150
not-
million? Yeah, do you want to spend 150 million, or, you know, in the case of, for example, the enhanced INAs that are up at about, you know, 8,000 kilograms per year of a, you know, 20,000 requirement for, you know, what's the percentage, Scott? Or what's the cost per kilogram for the enhanced INA using the subsidy as opposed to the cost per kilogram for a wastewater treatment plant?
Well, the rough numbers Cape-wide are sewering. The number we use is around $1,000 a kilogram average. The numbers for INA are in the $300 to $400 a kilogram.
But our compliance obligation, I'm not trying to parse this too thinly here because you're gonna have a lot of outreach to do. The requirement is for us to meet a TMDL, not for us to spend a certain amount of money because we're under a correction order that says we have to spend a certain amount of money. Is that right?
Yes, although the town is on the hook for this. Now, I can tell you, well, the towns, all 15 towns are on the hook for it in terms of ultimately paying for it. You're correct, there's not a specific dollar amount because the plan has not been prepared yet, but the 208 plan, there was a lot of discussion about financing. And the plan Cape-wide is to have local towns pay about half, have the state pay 25%, and have the feds pay 25%. That's the goal. So there are grants available. Unfortunately, the grant program that's been funding most of the Cape, called the Southern New England Program, or SNAP, excludes the Lower Cape. So you guys are not eligible for that one. But there are many other federal grant programs that are applicable and available to pay for part of it. And then the state, you know, is also willing to participate. In fact, they may provide some money for one of these pilot projects in Wellfleet. So there are other sources of money, but ultimately it is the town that will be responsible for paying for the implementation.
May
Helen
I
was
add
trying to get
something?
in there. Yes, go ahead, Helen.
Yeah, so I'm the one that usually brings this up. I'm concerned not just about the initial greater cost of having a large wastewater system, but the cost of maintaining the pipes over many years. Most of the money that gets spent on either wastewater systems or water systems is spent in the future. It's not the initial cost. The other thing is, there are areas of Wellfleet that it would be really impractical to have pipes coming from, let's say, all the dwellings around the ponds and so forth, which are part of what we need to address for the 208 plan, freshwater as well as saltwater, right? And they are already those communities that live around them, the ponds, the freshwater, you know, not always isolated bodies of water, because some of them go right into the Herring River, drain right into the Herring River. They are into the idea of IAs already. They talk about it. And what would be interesting, and I think financially more feasible, not just in terms of initial cost, right? But in terms of the maintenance, is to have individual lot owners with help from the town initially to get the systems in, to have a fund for that. We have a septic fund, actually, as Hillary knows, but to also have them responsible for maintenance going into the future. I think A, it would work better. B, you would have fewer pipes going long distances maintained by the town apt to leak in places where the stakes are too high to have a leak. Anywhere around the harbor, for example, you wouldn't want a septic leak. Just look what happened in Provincetown and you will understand what I'm talking about. So it's the long term that I think we should always be bringing up at the same time as the initial cost. Thank you.
And Helen, that's a good segue. If I could put my last slide up here. What we've been working on, Maria, is, and preliminary is the key word here in two senses. One is these are first cut at the cost estimates, and by no means is this the cost of the whole program to fix the problem and achieve the TMDL. This is really to get the program going and to start implementing the targeted plan. So these are 5 cost areas that we've identified. So to Helen's point that she just mentioned, one thought would be, let's get this health regulation in place so that we don't keep allowing more Title V systems going into the ground, which arguably are going to need to get replaced either with a sewer or an INA at some point in the future. So that's kind of the most expensive way to do it. Put in a Title V and then put in another INA later. And so this cost estimate would be to start that subsidy program with the health regulation. And as I showed you before, there's somewhere in the order of 20 or 30 systems going in per year. And so this would achieve the majority of them. There's also something called an RME, which I'll briefly explain. That stands for Responsible Management Entity. And that's what we're finding out is for DEP to approve this and for the town to manage this, instead of one centralized wastewater treatment plant, there needs to be a management program for operation, maintenance, monitoring, and reporting on all these systems going in the ground. This is a very, rough cost estimate actually to get that up and running. But there's more than just the physical cost of putting the systems in the ground, because they do need to be monitored and proven out. And I won't go through all of these costs unless we want to, but what we've tried to do is identify what we think are some costs for the town to consider to get some of these programs going. Now, I will just highlight the second bullet because we talked about it this morning. Kurt, Hillary, and David Formato, one of the other consultants working for the town. As you know, that project has gained approval with the Board of Selectmen. And this groundwater discharge permit is the design, the permitting and preliminary design to get that project going. So that's something that's probably pretty high priority too.
I've
And
got
then
about,
costs
I've got
go
about
through
10
some, yes.
10 minutes left, so I didn't know if that affects what you want to make sure we talk about.
I'm just going to stop. I'll stop there. Why don't I stop there and let you ask questions?
Well, I mean, Hillary, process-wise, the Board of Health looks at a bylaw that requires this type of system. From there, it goes to the select board, right?
No, so we would look at a regulation, not a bylaw. Then the Board of Health would advertise, hold a public hearing, and make the regulation. It doesn't go to the Board of Selectmen.
Okay.
So you're saved.
So, right, because my process concern is just making sure that I understand whether the Board of Health can obligate the town to this expense, or whether they're just making a recommendation, because ultimately budgets are going to be approved by the select board.
Yeah, no, we can make the regulation, upon property transfer or failed system, you will upgrade to an enhanced INA system, period. We can't obligate funds because we don't have any funds. So I think that's where you come in to find us money, or we use one of these other funds that are already existing, but we can't give people money that we don't have. So,
Right.
so that's
so there's a balancing act in that process that I would, I don't know what the timeliness is of decision by the Board of Health, but I recommend that we have this discussion with the select board ASAP, so that they have a sense of what the recommendation is for obligating the funding from the town.
And so in addition to that is the fact that we're still drafting our watershed permit, right? And in our watershed permit, we have all these options and then we select which options we want to use. So there's still sort of a public component of selecting the options as well, right? So, I mean, the Board of Health.
I'm with you. I think it begs a work session with the select board, relatively soon.
Yeah. For sure.
Absolutely, yep. Yeah, what we've been trying to do is get it focused down to the most cost-effective options, the most cost-effective alternatives, and a strategy that meets the goals and the spirit. Obviously, once we get a watershed permit, at that point, we would be under, effectively an order, an agreement with DEP to move forward with certain kinds of nitrogen mitigation strategies. So at that point, the town's obligated.
But you know what, Maria, just let me jump in for 1 minute. We've had 1 or 2 work sessions with the Board of Selectmen, with DEP, with a whole host of characters in town, in the fire station, and I think it's recorded. And I think that video would give you a lot of good background information, right? Does anybody else remember?
Yeah, because my whole point of it is, and I'll happily watch anything you send me the links to, but if a person were to install a Title V system, it would still get us to meeting the TMDL goals. But if they did it as a Title V, the homeowner, the property owner would be responsible for paying for it. Correct?
So if they have a failed system, they just upgrade to Title V. If they're on a cesspool or have a failed system, at this moment, they just upgrade to Title V unless there's a variance to a well or a wetland feature. So we're not requiring this enhanced treatment at this time. We require the standard IA, which gets to 19 milligrams per liter in theory, when there's a variance. So we're looking at systems that get to the enhanced INA, get down to 10 milligrams per liter or less.
Maria, if I may, one of the misconceptions out there, I think among part of the public, is that, hey, I'm putting in a brand new Title V system, so I'm all set, I'm complying. Title V systems don't remove any nitrogen. They never were intended to. And our problem is nitrogen. Title V was invented for pathogen removal primarily, which it does a great job of, but that's not what we're talking about.
Right,
So
and I'm overlooking that distinction too. Okay,
well, no,
so
a lot of people
that's
do.
that's the
right.
outreach that needs to be done in
Exactly.
conjunction.
Yes.
Okay, I get it. I
And-
guess we don't, it would probably make sense if you're really wanting something to be on this town meeting, that we have this party again soon, with Heather and Miriam.
Sure.
So that's more the funding strategy, yeah?
For sure, especially for, if it's timely that we're, because our deadline is going to come up pretty soon for articles.
It is. And Fred McGee has asked that we present at the Finance Committee toward the end of the month as well.
And I'll just let you know, my thoughts on the future of utilities and the management of utility systems looks a little different in some ways. You've got somebody who's a clerical person who has been stuck doing utility management work in the case of water anyway. But we need to look future-wise whether, this would be a heck of a lot of work for Hillary to keep track of and manage.
Jumping now.
There's still going to be, permits, and hands-on work, if you will, on Hillary's part. But at some juncture, we're going to have a complexity of a system that needs someone on staff with a utilities approach of things, water, wastewater, and I would include stormwater in that too, whether it's someone in Public Works, someone under Hillary's office, what approach we take, but we're gonna outgrow our capacity to do that with everybody's workload before
And I
too
think
long.
we've acknowledged that for years that we're going to need somebody. It's just when we get that somebody.
Right, and there's, I feel the reluctance from the Public Works Department for taking that on. But I think it's maybe there's some retirements in the future, or some, global look at things that we haven't been taking right now that we need to have a conversation about. With that, I thank you guys, because I do need to jump off I need to do a little prep for my next meeting.
Thanks for your time, Maria.
Oh, anytime, if you want to schedule, just send something to me and to Rebecca Eldridge in my office, and we'll do it as timely as we can. But I love the enhanced systems. I'm all about alternatives. I'm not about being the first one to try them. I can attest that I worked in a place where the director thought that trying the micro strainer was a great thing, to be the first one to try that technology. Same director that wanted us to do in-vessel garbage management, which, if anybody's familiar with Bedminsters, you've seen all the explosions of those things blowing up. So I'm all about new technology, but I'm not necessarily always wanting to be the first one to put my toe in the water. So, let's go forward in as sensible a way as we can. And, anything that sends us forward is going to have an outreach plan, because, I'm an ecologist with a natural resource policy, background. That's where my head's at. But think of the people that don't even really know how their septic system works. So anything that moves it forward has got to have education baked in. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Absolutely.
Part of the project moving forward, and always has been. Just haven't gotten there.
Oh, I know. I trust that. I trust that that's true. I trust that that's true, and making sure that our select board knows everything that they can wrap their minds around is probably a good idea. So if there's nothing else more immediate for me, I have to fade away to another meeting.
Thank you, Maria.
Thanks, Maria.
Hey, thanks. Let me know how I can help. Take care.
Take care.
So I think we kind of, I think we covered the items. I think you covered all the items on the agenda, Scott.
Very, very quickly.
Yeah. The only thing, I guess, for us to want to think about is, to look specifically at that last slide again.
Yeah. Oh,
Just to see if we think I think we need to have some discussion about what we want to continue moving forward as an idea for a town meeting warrant item. And if there's adjustments or changes or additions or subtractions, or, how we feel about that as a group in terms of a recommendation.
Kurt, can we try to have that meeting with Heather and Miriam sooner rather than later? Because there is that funding streams in the town to fund wastewater. So maybe we need to have that discussion to gain better insight into what we want to put on the warrant. Because if there's money for the enhanced IAs that doesn't need to go to town meeting, then we don't have to bring that, right? Is that the thought?
Of course, yeah.
So,
Yeah, I wanted to do just a sort of a sanity check to see, how the board felt about what Scott's got here, at least as a plan. And then obviously step 2 is how much we go forward to town meeting with versus what we might be able to get grant funded versus what we might be able to get from the Airbnb fund.
Yeah. And I guess I wonder too, like a parallel thought, if we, like the chicken before the egg kind of thing, where we need the watershed permit that says we're going to do these things so that it's legit and we're not just asking for money to, you know, dabble in these projects, right? Like these are meaningful projects that are going towards our nutrient reduction. Like them or hate them, it's this or a sewer, right? Like we kind of have to show that, I think.
Yeah, and Scott, I mean, at this point with town meeting potentially pushed out to May, you know, I would imagine we'd have a draft watershed permit.
We'll have a plan. I doubt we'll have a permit from DEP.
Yeah, no. I said a draft.
Yeah,
you know,
well,
a draft
yes,
watershed
I will
permit.
have, we will have a document that outlines all this, but I think we know what's going to be in there. I mean, with some tweaks back and forth.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, the more I've worked these numbers back and forth many times, and the only way I can see meeting these TMDLs is with this INA program.
Yeah.
Can
Don't see any way around it.
so Hillary, you mentioned that there was money someplace in the budget already for perhaps these innovative alternative septic systems.
Yeah, right now the town gets, you know, somewhere between, I don't know exactly what the number is, but somewhere between 200 and 500,000 a year coming from the so-called Airbnb tax, which is the new short-term rental tax. And the town gets a 2.5% kickback on that tax revenue. And it was supposed to be earmarked for wastewater. I mean, the legislation was passed with that money intended to go toward the towns for wastewater use.
Okay, so do we have to town meeting on that to say, hey, listen, this money was, do they have to approve it, or is it already kind of like, we don't, you know, this is, we don't have to ask you, we just, this is what we're going to use the money for?
The money goes into the general fund right now, so it's not earmarked for wastewater. The intention was that it would be used for wastewater, but again, it was set up to go into the general fund. So it really is up to the town to decide what it wants to allocate of that toward wastewater.
So what is, do we have a visibility on the budget this year?
No, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
I think also from a town accounting perspective, we've had some issues and money's going here and money's going there, not always coming out of the right account for the right thing. So I think the sooner we have that discussion too with the accounting team, we'll have a better understanding. And then perhaps we need to have that discussion with the Board of Selectmen to get that money put into wastewater.
And similarly with the shellfish propagation, the culture and all the rest of that stuff, is that already in the budget, or is that something that we would have to ask for, or that us and Nancy would have to ask for at town meeting because it's not in the current operating budget?
So there is money for coaching in the budget already. And that's in Nancy's budget. So that money is there.
Well, Hillary, I've been talking with Nancy, and the reason why this last bullet is really incomplete, and I probably shouldn't even put it on here, but she is working on this because the intent here would be to increase the amount of culch and a number of other items here to have a net increase in propagation. Because yes, it's true, she has a budget now, but that's intended to maintain things at the existing level. And what we're trying to do is see if we can increase the overall productivity and of the shell fishery. And so some of these numbers that are in here are intended to be increases on top of what she already has. And I don't have all the numbers yet. She's going to get back to me with some of those.
And the other thing, Hillary, that I, from my perspective, in terms of what DEP is going to be looking for, and Scott and I kind of talked about this a little bit, but my feeling is that we have to have something in the shellfish area that looks like sustainable nitrogen reduction and habitat enhancement. I mean, putting money into something so a commercial shellfish holder can harvest it I don't necessarily think that really achieves the purpose we're trying to get to.
Nope, not at all.
So, I think we've got to, we have the leverage of DEP wanting to see, that sustainability, to be able to kind of work with Dancy to say, okay, this looks like restoration and you've changed from no population to, let's just say 4 million in this area. That's a structural improvement.
Yeah.
And if you're committing to maintaining that and it's producing this kind of a nitrogen benefit, then it makes sense as as something to be in our, water quality improvement program. If it's just going to be put there and then taken out, that really doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of my feedback. I don't know how other committee members feel about it, but Ellen, go ahead. Other committee members, while you're thinking about it. Richard, you're on mute.
I'm glad, Scott, that you're working with Nancy. It makes me a little nervous that she's not here. Here's the thing. If you have this increased presence of shellfish, one of the things you have to do is manage it like a garden. That's my understanding. You can't just leave them sitting there. You have to harvest them and allow different classes, age classes, to come up. You can't just leave a reef set because it causes mortality because of density and other things, right?
Well,
That part of farming, hold on, I'm not done. Part of farming is figuring out how you get the most shellfish in a specific spot with what kind of management. And it's, I think, the wastewater committee's part of your job, if I may say this as an individual, remember, I'm not representing the select board here, to convey that and make sure the DEP knows that the gardening technique, if you will, so that there's the maximum amount of nitrogen removal because of shellfish, depends on harvesting as well as placement and sustainability of, a structure. I get what you said, Kurt, but I'm not sure that I hear what I just said. Thank you.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any scientific basis for the idea that you have to harvest. But I do agree that the idea of, coming up with some kind of, core sustainable population and maintaining that population. For example, the area that we did across from the at the pier, when Anna Maria was looking at the, at that project and the biological aspects of it as she was monitoring it for 5 years, she kind of felt that a population of about 4 to 6 million was what would produce a tremendous nitrogen benefit, which it did, but then that population was kind of sustainable. So to your gardening concept, Helen, I agree. I think, if the number is 4 or 6 million, as you're looking in that area and you're saying, okay, now we're at 7 or 8, you'd be harvesting 2 or 3 to bring, to figure out what that carrying capacity of the area is, or what the ideal population should be in an area that would involve harvesting and maintaining it at that level. So I hear you, but I also know that at a scientific level, the only way you can know what makes sense is by doing it and then sort of figuring out what the carrying capacity looks like. Go ahead. You're on mute. You're on mute, Helen.
I have to jump to another meeting, guys.
Okay.
I'm sorry. All right.
Fred, thank you.
Fred, thank you.
We'll talk more. Take care. Bye.
Okay. Helen, you're on mute. I think you're trying to speak.
Yeah,
There you go.
sorry about that.
No,
Yeah,
no
I
problem.
thought there is science on density. There's quite a lot of it. I've read it over the years and it's available. All you have to do is both density in the wild and density on leases or farmed areas. Okay, so there is science. And I'm not faulting you for not having found it yet, but go check it out. Thank you.
No, I have, it's site specific, and that's what I'm saying. You know, Anna Maria did do research to figure out what makes sense, you know, at the pier area, but that's why I think what I'd like to see in the shellfish propagation thing is a project, so that we can determine that, so we can start to get our, you know, get some science developed around, you know, what level of population makes sense and how to manage it. That we haven't done, and it, you know, anything that gets done in Wellfleet is going to require, you know, that kind of work to be able to determine what makes sense. Richard, you're on mute also. Yeah, I think you've been trying to get in on.
I don't know enough about shellfish to comment on it, but I do think that, you know, probably the science will follow wherever the shellfish are. In other words, we have to monitor them and figure out as time goes on. It does seem to me that looking at the preliminary cost estimates, that it's a big thing to try to get our arms around. And if it were me, I would try to break it down into saying, what are the costs, both in terms of capital costs, in terms of initially putting in a PRB, for instance, and then what are the maintenance costs and monitoring costs over that, which I think Scott has done. But with all of these, there's sort of a capital cost and there's a maintenance cost over time. In addition, there are other sources of funds besides the town for some of these programs. It'd be nice to try to draw out like a timeline that showed all of these, because then somebody could look at it and say, were you looking for all this money today? No, we're looking for X amount of money. And this is, you know, we give you a timeline for each thing that we want to do. And some of these things are, you know, sort of, they're projects that if they work out, we'll do more of. Some of them, like the INAs, I think we're sort of committed to doing INAs, you know, and whether it ends up being one particular type of INA or a different type of INA, we know that that's the biggest solution to the town's problem, instead of a septic system. I mean, instead of
Kurt, you lost your quorum. This is such a waste of time. It's awful. Didn't Fred understand that he was destroying the meeting by leaving? Where are the other members? You don't have a quorum. Ugh.
Well, I don't think we have any other members. I think we have our 3 members. That's all we have is
members. We had
John, I don't know what, John hasn't been to a meeting in quite some time. I'm not sure what I know he had a hip replacement.
I forgot John Cumberland.
Did you reach out to him and tell him about the meeting?
Yes,
Yeah, the email goes to all of them.
it goes to everybody.
Sorry.
So anyway, with that, we can't really
Okay,
formally adjourn, but I think this is a good start. What we ought to do is I'll try to schedule another meeting per Hillary's comment. Maybe next week we can get a meeting together with the accounting folks so we can start to dive into that issue. Anybody else have any other?
Just quickly respond to Richard's comment, which is a good one. I just want to let you know, I am working on a long-term plan that would have all of the over this time, but the purpose of this was really for town meeting, thinking that we have something coming up and a deadline and what should we be prioritizing. And that's why I just want to get this in front of you. But you're absolutely right. This is going to, I'll be providing you a much more longer term, detailed financial plan to go along with the proposed actions. That'll be in the plan document.
Good.
And the idea, I think, you know, it's going to take some time for all of us to digest and think about, you know, exactly what does make sense, not only for town meeting, but then also in the longer term plan to see if this is coming together as something that makes sense. We're just starting the discussions on financing. So it's going to be an ongoing conversation. Great. Well, thank you. With that, I think we'll sign off. We don't have a quorum to adjourn, but thank you all, and we will. You'll see an email with a meeting, hopefully for next week sometime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Scott, enjoy Vermont.
Thank you very much.